Join us on the SwimMonkey.
SwimMonkey TV.
On the Monkey.
Holding water, in the water we go. We talk about our future champions, swim techniques and Olympic strokes. Holding water, so much you will know about dolphin kicks, flip turns, dives, and how to find an awesome coach. Hosted by Bryan, Welter, and Kerns. Holding water is where competitive swimming is learned.
What's up, guys? Welcome back. Another episode of Holding Water, weekly webcast dedicated to age group swimming. Glad to have you guys with us. Bryan, what's up, man?
Not much, man. Doing all right. Just, getting back to work, getting back to practice, doing what we need to do. Pretty excited about the show tonight. We've got a pretty good guest. He's the USA Swimming High Performance Director for USA Swimming National Team. It's been doing video for, a long time. And I think we're ready to bring him on. Russell Mark from USA Swimming.
Hey, all. Glad to be here. Really excited about this.
We're excited to have you, man. Thanks for coming on.
Yeah, for those of you guys who don't know or have never seen Russell talk, usually when there's a coaching convention going on and Russell gives a talk, there's a full room. You got to find a space in the back of the room to get a chance to hear it. So we're excited to get something out of this. Russ, I think the cool thing with this whole COVID pandemic has been the amount of information sharing that's going on from swim coaches on platforms like this. So tell us kind of stuff you've been up to and kind of what's been going on with you up in Colorado Springs.
Yeah, it's been really an interesting time and just trying to take advantage of all the time that there is available and for me to get projects done that I typically wouldn't have time for or don't have time for, and things I've always wanted to do. I haven't seen a live swimming stroke in probably since the middle of March. So people have been sending me, actually the last couple of weeks, a bunch of our national teamers have been sending me videos of them doing some dive efforts, but I haven't seen live swimming in a really long time now. So it has been really good though. The last month, I'd say I've been trying to develop as much education opportunities as possible. So right now I'm editing a presentation that John Urbanchek did, and all of everything that he's done and he's developed with his training system. So just trying to make that in a very easily consumable format for people. But then also trying to develop some other education opportunities. Early on in the pandemic period, I did a lot of, I would say, data analysis of our race stats projects, race stats information. So looking at tempos and cycles as athletes have progressed through their career. So, looking at our best athletes now, but what were they doing when they were 14 or 15 years old in their, with regards to their tempo and cycles? Because I think immediately people want to look at what our best athletes are doing in their tempos and cycles, and then try to translate that to their younger, less physically mature athletes. So that's a lot of the stuff that I've been doing in terms of swimming.
So what have you come up with on that?
Oh, so I looked at a sample of probably 10 of our athletes, 10 of our best current athletes. Because, I would say our pros right now is when we really start having a very developed collection of video collection of when they were at junior nationals. So before juniors, definitely had have a harder time finding video of them. But it's really interesting. Typically when an athlete gets to college, the drop in cycle counts. But I would say typically from, when they're 13, 14, or 15, they start getting to the tempos that they are racing at right now. So it's really interesting. And honestly, I had no idea what to expect. And looking at 10 of our best athletes across different strokes and different distances. And to see, an athlete like Caleb Dressel, and we know the tempo, and Lily King, we know the tempos that they race at right now. They were racing at that when they were about 14 or 15 as well. And maybe like 13, 12, 13, 14, they're not quite there, but at some point in that age, they do make that leap to where they are racing at tempos right now. But then the drop in cycles when they get to college makes sense to me, because obviously they're developing strength with probably a more enhanced weight program. But that's kind of what I saw from the start, is just the ability for tempo to be relevant tempos at a younger age.
Hey, Russell, have you looked any, I think as an age group coach, some of the things that Bryan and I probably hear a lot, maybe after a race, is, well, that 500 free was really good, but their start, they just look how much time they lost on their start, or things like that, is probably things that age group coaches that are listening today hear. And so, one of the things that we try to talk to ours about here in Mobile is, the start is such an explosive, dynamic movement that you learn over time. And I feel like that's one of those areas where, although, tempo you may see, and stroke cycles, you may see those be consistent from 15 to 18, but with regards to starts and velocities in the water and things like that, have you looked at any of that, and how much difference you see from athletes there?
Yeah, I don't really put that much weight into how they're doing off the start, at a younger age. There are definitely technical things that you can start talking about to kind of lay the foundation for what their best start technique would look like as they get older. But in terms of velocity to 15 meters, time to 15 meters, I mean, just looking for some technical goodness, some good based technical foundation, and then as they get older and as they get stronger, those things will develop a little bit better.
Cool. Bryan, go ahead.
So yeah, on that note, I mean, I'm going to change it to turns. So going into, like, when we're talking about turns and carrying velocity into the turn, carrying velocity out of the turn, I know Jonty posted some stuff about, like, not being extended all the way, or being less compacted coming into the turn and popping off of the wall. There's a lot of different ways. What are your thoughts on what we should be telling these kids at 12 to 14 on how they need to be developing a turn that's going to allow them to have Caleb Dressel type walls down the road? Not that we're going to get there, but you know what I mean. Unless they got a 40-inch vertical, we're probably not going to get that, but you know what I'm saying.
Yeah, I think a lot of turns in general is about just being attentive to that kind of detail. Obviously, athletes go in and out of walls in workouts kind of mindlessly oftentimes. So I think it's paying attention to it. I think the things to really think about is planning for your wall, not just not just swimming and then the wall happens to be there at whatever stroke that you happen to be on, but just more planning for it so that you can time it good in and out. I do like, the idea, obviously, like, there are technical things that you can focus on. One thing I see with the national team, even our best athletes, when it comes to turns, when it comes to freestyle and backstroke turns, I like athletes using their hands to push water over their head and then getting that turn to help getting their feet over. And then on all strokes, just making sure that you have your feet planted in a good square kind of position so that you get a good push off the wall. I see so many turns where the feet are planted rather crooked and not lined up together, or stacked right on top of each other. And so you don't have the feet planted like you would jump off the ground. So you're trying to think of it like you're jumping off the wall. So I would say just those basic things are things that people can think about at any age.
Yeah, and I think one of the things that Jonty did put on there that we worked on looking at that video and kind of seeing how we can apply some of those general concepts was just not putting your heels completely buried on the wall so that you can kind of pop off of that turn and be athletic. But there was some neat stuff in that. But I know we've exchanged some emails back and forth, and we talked about some short axis strokes. So if you guys are good, I want to get right into that with let's start off with some butterfly, Russell. What do you feel like are some core concepts of successful butterfly that we should be teaching age group kids?
Yeah, I love talking about fly. We've, as a country, I feel like we've talked about it in much better ways over the last couple of years. And there's been some really awesome conversations. From a national team standpoint, we do have opportunities in the stroke. And I feel like that trickles down to all levels of USA Swimming. Technically, what I think is really important is thinking about always moving forward. I think the stroke has long been thought of as like these long up and down on undulating movements. And we've seen some of our best athletes ever swim like that. And I think the movement needs to be flatter. I think it needs to be supported by two awesome kicks, probably equal in size. And I think the press forward needs to be thought of as forward instead of diving your head way down. I don't like it when I see athletes that tuck their chin to their chest and their forehead is the deepest part that they're pointing down towards the bottom. I want to see forward, and I want to see some open space between your chin and chest and really pressing forward and just trying to get your, as soon as I see the forehead diving down, like that to me means that your head is disconnected from the rest of your body and you're not getting the full motion that you can effectively from your waist up in that press forward.
Awesome. Hey, coaches out there, if you guys are watching, you can click on the video and comment on this. We'd love to know how you guys are teaching these concepts to your athletes, just in the name of sharing information. If you guys come up with something that we haven't, I know Bryan and I have felt like we've learned something every week from coaches that have been on here across the country. And so really cool stuff there. Bryan, kind of give us your thoughts on fly, what you teach and how.
So yeah, I was at the Age Group Summit last time around, whenever that was, a year ago now. And you talked about one of the things that struck me as interesting, because I've never taught it this way, was when you were talking about the recovery on butterfly, you were talking about really attacking the front of the stroke. And I've always taught it as more of a wider entry with more of a chest press before the catch. And I'm wondering, so with age group kids, am I doing it wrong, or is that attacking the entry on the recovery? Is that something that we develop down the road once we find the body position and the body line? Does it make sense?
No, I think you're absolutely right. I mean, body position, body line is the foundation for every stroke. And I do think that is where you start with everything, for sure. And then building those motions around it. It's interesting. I just had I would say, so that attack forward is kind of layer on top of it. And I just actually had a really awesome phone call with Chuck Batchelor from Bluefish in the Northeast just this week about butterfly. And we were talking about just one of his athletes. He sent me a video, but he feels like it's pretty typical of a lot of the athletes that he sees, and just how the swimmer was kind of diving down with their hands. And, we talked about just how survival fly, when you see an athlete thinking about survival fly, they're worried about getting their arms over the water. And really good fly, they can think about everything else. And so, but I do think that everything else, pulling water, really being effective, starts from being effective on that attack forward, on that driving forward in. The one thing we talked about was like kicking your hands forward and like timing that so that your hands are entering as the kick is really kind of starting to engage. So really thinking those two motions together, because a lot of times when I see an athlete dive their hands down, they're like rounding at the back. It's just not a firm movement, a firm like unified movement from the waist upward. The other thing that we were seeing with his athlete, and this going a little bit away from the arm stroke, but just on that second kick, this athlete had two awesome kicks, but the second kick, the kick at the finish of the stroke, the feet were coming way out of the water. So just keeping the feet engaged, thinking about that aspect as well. I think every coach probably teaches two kicks, but trying to make sure that you keep that second kick in the water, which has a tendency to come up a little bit higher.
So,
Yeah. Hey, Russ, go ahead, Bryan. Go ahead.
So going back to the entry. So I guess my question is I teach the kids to come in a little bit here just because I don't think they have the flexibility to get the chest forward and to get into the right position. And if they try to come in above their shoulders, that's when you end up turning the hands and you end up getting that dive forward because you can't press the chest forward and the armpits forward if you're inside here for most of these kids nowadays because they just don't have the shoulder flexibility. Would you agree with that or disagree with that? Or
Totally right on. Like, absolutely. And I think, keeping your hands on the entry, keeping it lined up with the width of your shoulders is kind of where you want to be, and I do think you generally just want to be pressed in between your arms. You just really I think most people have a harder time going underneath their arms. And that's kind of what you want to try to avoid, is going past your arms in that line. And I would say you want to kind of get your body in line and then go with that and not go any further. And
so, but
I'll say it right now. Michael Phelps is like the picture that people have in their mind when they think of fly, because we've seen him swim so much from above water and underwater. And obviously he's the greatest of all time. And he's a guy that was pressing way below his arms. And I think that is not what most people can do. And you talk about the flexibility of athletes, of younger athletes, they're not there. Most people don't ever get there. So I would say, like, generally, trying to keep your body and your head in line with your arms.
Yeah, see, I've always tried to get them to get even try to get the chest forward in front of their body, because I think it makes their hips stay up. And I think with age group swimming, once your hips fall, you've completely lost it. Like, you're done. You're going to add 3 strokes of 25 in an age group 200 fly. But so, we try to work on that press and then turning the pinkies in on the catch to make sure we're not ending up out here. Am I doing that right?
Yeah. No, I like that. I think that's great. You guys have had some really good swimming, so I think you guys are definitely doing something right.
Hey, we had a question in here, and it was actually on our list to talk about thoughts on the head position during the breath and that timing of the breath. And we had a question about that. Russ, what are your thoughts on where the head should lie during the stroke and then during the breath?
Yeah, during the, and this is what I said to Chuck Bassford this week too. Like, I think the best technically correct fly has a lot more head movement than we're typically used to thinking about, and that we're often afraid to talk about, because I do think that the head has to move and it has to kind of tilt up and down. So on the fly breath, like, you are lifting your head a little. I would say tilting your head. You're not lifting it. You're tilting it forward to allow that to happen. And I think when you want to do that, I would say immediately after the catch. So you hit your entry, you're going into your catch, and your catch, obviously you don't want to compromise your catch by breathing during the catch, which often leads to somebody pressing downward. So initiate the catch and then pull and then tilt your head forward to get to there. So I would say the breath is happening as your hands are passing your shoulder and your chest is when the breath is happening. And, like I said, there will be a head tilt forward, and then you are getting your head back in line.
Cool. And now Bryan may agree or disagree with me on this, but we talked about survival fly earlier. As an age group coach, I try to stop it as soon as I see it. The last thing I want them to do is just do a bunch of garbage butterfly. If they're doing it wrong, I want to stop it and fix it as soon as possible. Especially with regards to that timing of the breath, because if you can't time that breath, there's no way you're ever going to get that second kick in the right time.
With young swimmers, you also see, like, I see breaths that are very early, like people entering and then trying to get the breath immediately, and I also see breaths that are way too late. So getting the catch, kind of finishing the stroke, and then kind of lifting up, and that's probably even younger swimmers. I would say the breathing, just like freestyle, the breathing in fly is the cause of so many flaws. I got a question for you guys. Like, how do you guys feel about eliminating the breath and like using a snorkel? And do you guys use that when you guys talk about when you guys teach the breathing and try to get that timing right? Because obviously the breathing a lot is going to cause a lot of flaws.
So my answer to that is single arm butterfly, breathing forward with the other arm to your side. I think it forces you to find balance. It forces you to find body position. It forces you to learn the timing of the breath. It's pretty awful for the first 6 to 8 weeks of the season. And then once they start to figure it out, it makes a dramatic impact on the timing and the rhythm of the stroke. So that would be my answer. I'm not a snorkel guy. I don't do a lot of snorkels at all, ever actually. So that's my way of working on that breathing. And then we just talk about the timing of it. But, we stress trying to stretch the chin forward or the top of the head forward. Like those are the two things. If you're not breathing, it's the crown of your, that ouch button on your baseball cap, or the point of your chin. So I don't know, Tyler, what do you got on that?
Yeah. So, I think I try to concentrate, especially when early we're teaching the breath timing, making sure that the head hits before the hands hit out front so that you're not leaving that chin up, because there's just no way you're going to engage any catch, I think, in the front third of that stroke. So we try to talk about as far as when the head goes back down. I know there's a question in there. I think it's really important that we teach them to get in the rhythm of putting the head down. We do use snorkels with fly. Sometimes I like to actually do that with fins on to kind of prevent the over undulation and going too deep and kind of dive bombing the butterfly, to kind of keep them on the surface while we're trying to teach that second kick, especially put that snorkel on so we can feel that kick in the right timing of where the hand is to, I try to tell them, when you get to that point and your hands are kind of in that position underneath your hips, that second kick really puts a lot of downforce on the water, allows your hands to snap out and recover. I know Bryan and I both like to tell kids to kind of relax the shoulders on butterfly as they recover around. But once they get to here, you're trying to get into that shoulder. I guess I usually talk about like a pull-up position. You don't do a pull-up with your hands right here. You don't do a pull-up with your hands way out here, but get in that natural position like Bryan talked about here, just outside the shoulder, and then really just make sure your head gets back down into that body line so that you can continue to keep that flow. I don't know if that's right, but that's what.
Yeah, no, I love this. I love hearing you guys talk. You guys are, everything you're doing, this is why you guys are, are good coaches, is that there's rationale and great rationale behind everything you're doing, and good thought that clearly you put into it.
So
go ahead, I got a question. I've been waiting to ask you this question for 10 years. So 100 fly, 50 fly, 100 fly versus 200 fly. I have a theory that there's a more effective 200 butterfly stroke that's different from what it is that the majority of us are teaching and what it is the majority of athletes are doing. I think if you look at the comparisons between the progression of the 100 fly and the comparisons between the 200 fly, you see significant improvement in the 100, not as much in the 200. And I would argue that that's a stroke modification. So I go back to like maybe Davis and Tom Malchow and some of those guys that had the more bent elbow recovery and had their heads much higher in the water and never went below that flat line. So all their fly was undulating above the line, back to the line, as opposed to Phelps and Schooling and those guys where they're undulating up and below the line. Does that make sense? I don't know that I explained that the way that I wanted to, but and the other thing is that when you do that head up butterfly with the more bent arm recovery, Dakota Hodgson is who comes to mind. I don't know if you're familiar with that name, but Dakota was a high elbow guy. He breathed every stroke and he drove out and he got so flat on the front of that stroke. And I've never seen a kid that can swim the back half of the 200 fly like that kid, because he just didn't get tired. So I'm interested as to your thoughts on that. And I also would ask is, so when you're watching these kids swim when they're younger, I look at it and I'm like, okay, this kid's got a natural high elbow recovery. Instead of trying to break him and make him do this, why don't I just build on that? Let him breathe every stroke, let him learn how to do it, and throw the head into the front to get the hips up and to get back into that flat body line. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I mean, another swimmer that I think of that comes to mind with that kind of higher, like riding higher in the water and swimming fly like that is Haley Flickinger. I think she's absolutely like what you described, just like very easily can maintain, or it looks very easy to maintain a very high body position and kind of stay high above the surface. I do think that especially at the older levels, the 100 and 200 fly are becoming so different events now. The 100 and at the world elite level is becoming much more power and tempo based, and you're not seeing as many people that do the 100 and also the 200 anymore. And but I guess in general, I like your theory. I would say that those are the people that probably are more of a propensity to be better in the 200, is those people that can kind of hold their body higher above the water, kind of enter like that and just look lighter on the water. It's kind of how I would describe it. Just have a light touch on the water, a light entry, and not really like powering forward. And I would agree with that. Obviously, like to develop that a little bit further and to get a little bit more speed, like someone like Tom Malchow or Haley Flickinger, like people who aren't as good at the 100, you need to find ways to develop that so that there is a little bit of a gear change that they can get to within a race. But yeah, I think that makes a lot of sense.
Well, it's now it's pretty similar to breaststroke as well. I mean, you start looking at PD and looking at Lily King and these guys, and Lily's struggling to go up to the 200 because she just doesn't have the distance per stroke and she can't maintain that tempo for that whole race. I mean, isn't it fairly similar? I mean, I think about the old Amanda Beard breaststroke where she was way up out of the water and then just had that incredible drive forward. And, we don't see that much of that anymore, but obviously that breaststroke was pretty good for the 200 breaststroke, considering she made 3 Olympic teams or something, so I don't know. I just think about it in fly as well. I feel like that distance-based stroke versus that power and tempo-based stroke is not the same.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And, you brought up tempo and what that brings to it too. I mean, in fly, if it's okay, like I do want to touch on this because I do think it's really relevant to training. One thing I did, I mentioned a couple of the things I've done in terms of tempo, but one thing I did was also look at fly and breaststroke tempos, especially because I do think that there's some unique aspects to it that are really important that people know. And, in the 100 fly, the men, and I'm going to talk in like seconds per cycle. So the men are doing the world elite men are doing the 100 fly. Let me back up a second. Everyone in fly is doing tempos all pretty much in the same range. And you don't have a lot of variation for elite fly, men, women, 100, 200. All the men in the 100 fly most of the tempos are in the 1.05 to 1.10 range. There's a very tight range. The women are basically the same, 1.05 to 1.10. The 200 fly, the men are probably 1.15 to 1.25. So just a little bit slower. You have the men 100 at 105 to 1.1, and then the men 200 at 115 to 125. You have the women at 105 to 1.1, and then the 200, they're in 1.1 to 1.2. These are very narrow bands, and this is for the entire race, not just talking about like where they're starting or where they're finishing. Through the entire race, all of the tempos for all the 50s fall within this range. And to me, what that means is that when you're swimming whole stroke fly, when you're training whole stroke fly, if you're constantly, I would say, crushing your athletes where they are doing survival fly, they're probably falling into a much slower tempo than what is actually relevant in a race. And this kind of goes away from the 100, 200, but like what we were just talking about technically, but I think this is important. I hope the numbers didn't get people lost, but I visually it might be easier to see, but I would say generally what we're trying to do, I would say, is trying to have training tempos that are relevant to what you ultimately want to race in. And when we talk about fly being a you can train it. Like you've heard stories of Mary T being trained and just doing lots of volume. I would say for most athletes that don't have that light stroke on the water that you talk about, like they're going to slow down their tempo and just fall out of anything relevant. And I think that's a really important distinguishing point to make about fly.
Hey, Russell, so you mentioned earlier when we started your evaluation of those elite level athletes as far back as you could get your hands on with regards to videos. And you kind of mentioned that 14, 15 range. So do you feel like it's that's about the time for coaches to really focus in and hone in on moving from the developmental teaching of the stroke to now we're trying to hit the tempos at race pace and be able to repeat those for whatever your distance, I don't want to say distance specialty is at 15, because a guy at 15 could be, he's just a little boy compared to what he's going to be down the road. You feel like that's about the age range?
Yeah, it's not, and that's the thing. Like, I'm not sure as an age group coach how much I would focus on tempo. I think tempo is a product of your mechanics and your training, and especially at a younger age. And so like having good mechanics and being allowed, I guess, in your training or being enhanced in your training to have that good tempo. I would say if anything, 15, kind of that 14, 15 range, maybe earlier, because like I'm talking these athletes when they get to juniors. So I'm not sure exactly what they were doing before, but let's say like Haley Flickinger, when she was 15 years old, a sophomore in high school at juniors, she was swimming with a 1.12 average tempo in her 200 fly. She was going 214 in her 200 fly, went 1.12 tempo. And, right now she races at a 1.10 tempo and she's going 205. And looking at Caleb Dressel in his 100 fly, when he was a sophomore in high school, in the 100 fly, he went 55.1 and he was racing at an average of 1.07 tempo. And now at last year's Worlds, he was 1.08 tempo average. So yes, I would say like you have to be kind of in a good sweet spot of tempo when it comes to younger age. And I just saw that comment come up, rhythm, not tempo. I absolutely agree with that. Like, that's why I would say like, I'm not sure as an age group coach, how much I would focus on the number as much as like, what a good rhythm and a good movement looks like and that continuous motion.
Well, I think you have to recognize what's fast enough and what's not fast enough. I mean, if they can go faster, but they're just not going faster, and you can say, hey, you need to pick up the tempo. We need to be, 0.2 seconds faster. And they can do that without dropping the elbows or sliding the hands through. I think that you can get away with it. But I think you do. I think you're right, Russell. You got to be careful because if you push the tempo, they're just going to drop the elbows and slip and do whatever. I think a backstroke spin drill is the perfect example. Like you can drive 0.6 tempo on backstroke spin drill if you don't hold any water, but you're not going anywhere. You're not going to have any distance per stroke. You're not going to do anything. So I think that balance with the age group kids is an interesting teeter-totter.
Yeah, and that's the same approach I actually have with our national team athletes too. We're only looking at tempo when they get to a race effort. And then I'm thinking about what are the things that I see that is getting in the way of their tempo? Are there technical things that I see that gets in the way of them having the effective tempo that they need to have? Or is it just they're just tired from training and they're going to be a little bit off? And then when they finally rest, that their tempo will fall in place. And typically that's a lot of it, but typically there's also a lot of examples where like breathing gets in the way of someone's tempo. And you're going to see that a lot in fly. You're going to see that a lot in freestyle too. But then are there, in any stroke, are there technical things that they're doing with their arms, too much rotation or whatever, getting in the way of what they should be doing to have that ideal rhythm and that effective rhythm?
All right. So, Bryan, do you have anything else on butterfly you want to ask Russ?
Yeah, one more question. So when you're looking at, I was never a big focus on the bending the knees, and I'm going to go back to Hodgson, but this time I'm going to go to Charlie Hodgson, who coached Vrabel and those guys back in the day. And Charlie used to talk a lot about you need more bend in your knees. You need more bend in your knees. You need more up kick. You know, and that was one of the things that he was hammering all the time. And I've started using it more. I'm just wondering what your thoughts on the bend in the knees with fly and what the force on the up kick needs to be versus the down kick. Because the down kick takes care of itself, in my opinion, with 95 to 98% of your athletes. And the up kick is kind of an afterthought. Do we need to be teaching the up kick, and do we need to be teaching bending the knees? In your opinion, obviously.
Yeah, I'm a huge fan of bending knees. I think it's really important. I think when people go, well, I think the knee bend sets up, especially the second kick, which oftentimes, if you see an athlete that doesn't have that second kick, the kick at the finish, they're not bending their knees to set it up. And I think it has to be a very conscious, deliberate movement on the swimmer's part. To keep the feet in the water, you actually have to bend your knees and drive your knees a little bit down into the water in order to keep the feet in the water too. You're gonna feel some resistance on your thighs. And I think that's the trade-off that you're gonna have to take, or you're gonna have to decide between. So I think bending the knees is really important. I think where people go wrong with the knee bend and not moving water effectively, and I see this in flutter kick too, in a freestyle kick, is they'll bend the knees, and instead of really pushing the water all the way down, they'll bend the knees and then just kind of slide it forward. And instead of really forcing the feet and forcing that water down. And I think that's where you see in freestyle, especially like someone bicycle kicking, instead of like you bend the knees and the feet will stay along the surface as opposed to pushing water all the way down. And so that's what you're trying to get in fly too. And then the second part, you asked about what should the emphasis be on the up kick. Big fan of that too, mostly because, I mean, to get to the down kick, which is really the propulsive part of the kick, you have to get through the up kick, and holding water in that up kick, I would say, is important, but then it also gets you to the next down kick a lot faster and a lot more effectively.
So,
hey, Bryan, we talked about the butterfly kick a couple weeks ago, more like kicking a ball, kind of relating that into like kicking a ball.
I was just ready to go with.
Perfect. Wavelength right here. So like for me, one of the things I like to do is I like to have kids kick dolphin kick on their side so that they have to force water in both directions. Do you guys do a lot of that, Bryan?
We do some of it. We've started to do some more of it. One of the things that we've really been talking about, and tell me if Jason Welter's my head coach at our site, and one of the things that we've been talking about is really trying to finish the dolphin kick. Like if you're on your back, you want to finish the dolphin kick up here. If you're on your stomach, you want to finish the dolphin kick down here. You don't want to finish it right here. It's got to finish in front of you or above you, depending on where you're at. And that's one of the things that we've really been talking about. And I think that goes into the kicking a soccer ball. You're not going to kick the soccer ball under your shoulder. You're going to finish the kick through and past your shoulders and your hips. So, yeah, I don't know.
A lot of mine look more like they're trying to shoo a little tiny dog off of their feet, when they're kicking these tiny little butterfly kicks rather than trying to load up and kick that soccer ball.
And it starts, like if they're on their stomach, it starts here and it finishes there. And it's this. And it doesn't allow for them to get the body involved and get into the undulation they need because they're not able to generate that force on the front side of the kick. I don't know. I think now, after thinking about it for 30 years, that's why kids are more natural on their back in a lot of cases kicking underwater than they are on their stomach. Because when they're on their back, they feel that up kick a little bit more. And when they're on their stomach, it's harder to drive that down below you and feel like it's effective. And, and I look at, I'm a big Ryan Lochte fan. I look at Lochte, and I mean, his underwaters on his back are unbelievable. And on his stomach, they're pretty good. They're not great, but they're pretty good. I mean, obviously better than everybody else. But what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think that is absolutely a legitimate thought. I think that Also, when you're on your stomach, when you're doing that, if you're doing the kick right and really following through below your body and in front of you, it's going to be pushing you up towards the surface. So a lot of times people will compromise that motion that you're trying to get and will pop their hips so that it doesn't push them, force them up to the surface. So they'll pop their hips way too much when they're on their stomach, and therefore kind of stop the propulsion, but it'll keep them under, but it stops their propulsion. So, you watch someone like Phelps, and when he would do his last underwaters off the wall, he would go in kind of a check mark and go down and then up. And I think that controls, like, him dictating the direction of his dolphin kicks kind of made it so that he didn't have to compromise his technique, intentionally or not, or knowingly or not. But I think that's a real good vehicle to help that.
Both those guys did that, right? Going into the last Olympics. I mean, in 2014, Ryan and Michael started going, 7 feet deep off the last wall in the 200 freestyle and just blasting by everybody on the last 50. I mean, that's when we started talking about, actually, that was probably in 2008 when they first started doing it. But then, obviously it's developed further on. And then Ryan took it a step further and flipped it over onto his back and created the Ryan Lochte rule. But, I think, I talk about push to depth, especially with age group kids. And I'm interested in your thoughts on this. So I don't feel like age group kids are strong enough to kick down and kick up. Like, that effort they have to put into kicking down to get to the depth they have to be at to kick back up. I don't think that there's many age group.
Oh, I think we lost Bryan there. Well, he's frozen. We'll get him back in here. I think what he's going to say is there's not a lot of age group kids that just have the power in the core and through the middle of that body to be able to generate that kind of torque underwater. So I think it's, we're all trying to teach those kids. We've had a lot of discussions on this show about teaching underwaters to age group kids and how important that is. So we're going to try to get Bryan back in here, and if he wants to come back in and jump into that. But Russell, moving on to another short action stroke, and so many variations of, I think, how people swim breaststroke at a young age and what that turns into at an older age. What are kind of your core concepts for that stroke?
Yeah, I would say it's all about shooting forward too. And actually, it's going to sound unintentionally, it's going to sound a lot like it did the things I say in breaststroke. Really driving your hands, and not just your hands, but your body into line and driving it forward. Obviously, you see a lot of younger kids, I think, try to drive their hands down. I think a big thing to me that I've been in terms of talking the shape of the pull is being rounded through the stroke. So being rounded through the stroke and then having a triangle of space in front of you. So right here. So triangle of space. And that triangle of space in front of your body is where your head is going to drive into. So I think that's a really important aspect into the shape of the pull, rounded, not squares. And then having the triangle of space in front of you, and that all those things set up how you can drive forward into it. And I don't want to see elbows squeezing in. I think that gets in the way of your body being able to drive forward. Obviously, as your arms get more extended, your elbows are going to get a little bit closer. But having your elbows meet right in front of your chest is not, I think, what you're trying to get in order to achieve that end product where you're driving forward. There has been one other thing that I think ultimately, like, you want to have high hips and keep your hips high in the water too. And I think young kids, and even I see this in the national team too, people diving down with their hands is a maybe unknowing mechanism to keep your hips up. That's what that's going to do. One way to combat that, in addition to driving forward, is to, and this is like something that I think is a little bit, maybe a little bit requires a little bit more thought before you implement it, is finishing the kick or initiating the kick so that the kick goes downward before coming up. And so I do think, like, obviously when you bring your knees in to set up the kick, your knees are going to be low. So just kind of, I would say, kicking downward at an angle, and that'll pop your hips up, and then getting your feet into line. And, you know, it happens so fast when, you know, all the elite athletes are swimming that you can't really notice that there's that initial downward action.
Looks
But
like a kick, right? With your toes turned out. I mean, it's really essentially once you get to that widest point when your feet are loaded, it's like a downward, it's a dolphin kick, and you point your toes at the end and snap that, right?
Absolutely. Yes, absolutely. That's the way you're going to catch the most water, and that's going to pop your hips up. And in doing so, I think you will also prevent people from diving down with their hands to get the hips up.
It's good. Yeah, we were on a Zoom throughout the summer with some coaches from around the country talking about breaststroke, and I felt like the game you played when you were a little kid, where you know, you've got 10 things to choose from, and one of them does not fit here because there was, you know, 9 really, really great head coaches of some really good programs and guys that I look up to and respect and learn a lot from, and yourself. And we were talking about this breaststroke. And one of the things that I think Tony out in California talked about is, you know, there used to be a conversation about trying to, and you still want to hide the heels behind your behind, I would assume, but there's going to be some natural drop in the knees. Are you encouraging athletes to focus more on keeping the knee integrity and hiding them behind? Or are you focusing more on just loading that kick to get the most force possible out of that kick?
Yeah, I think loading the kick is the most important part. You know, I think bringing your knees forward and creating resistance in that way, unfortunately, it's just a natural part of breaststroke. Like, that's just not really going to go away. So, like, there are many great breaststrokers that I've seen that the knees come down right below the hips, and like the thighs will be like directly facing the water, and that's just a part of breaststroke. But the whole point is to get through that as quickly as possible. Bring the heels up really fast, and don't spend a whole lot of time there before you push back. Yeah. And so I think that's the key part of it, and that's the only way to really set up that really powerful aspect of the motion.
Like Lily, Sony have a different kick than Moses. Welter's back in. But let me finish this real quick, Bryan, with the breaststroke kick with those guys. When you're talking about that downward motion and you're talking about finishing that kick, one of the things that I think I see the most in coaches out there, I think you guys probably see a lot of things, is kids get to that point and they load that kick and then it just stops, and it stops right here. And that last little bit of finish and that point of the toes at the end to drive that hips up, for me, is as important as where the feet are width-wise throughout the kick.
Yeah, absolutely. Totally agree with that.
So,
all right, Bryan, what you got, man?
I'm going to go back to a personal experience that Tyler probably remembers from when I was in Nashville. I had a really good 11-year-old girl breaststroker who was a very Amanda Beard-like style breaststroke, brought her knees very low underneath her body, and was incredible at setting the kick at her hips. Okay, and I took advice from my boss, John Morris. You know that guy, he doesn't know anything. And he told me that I needed to get her heels up a lot faster. And so I got her heels up a lot faster, and what it created was a slip right here. So we weren't getting a hold of the water until almost the end of the kick, because we were trying to bring the heels up so fast that we weren't setting right here where we needed to be. So I guess, number one, I'd like to warn everybody out there, be careful how much you mess with really good breaststroke kick with an age group kid. And then the other part is, like, Russell, when you look at that, what do you think about that comment? I don't know. This has been a working theory in my brain, because the girl did everything I wanted and we swam terrible based on what I asked her to do. And so I'm still beating myself up over it.
Yeah, she might not have been able to separate, like, bringing your heels up faster and only doing that part faster, because you're not trying to, like, move through this any faster. You're just trying to bring the heels up this part faster, but then keep everything else the same. And obviously, if the timing got a little bit different too, she might not have been able to have the, I guess, opportunity to kind of set those heels out, because absolutely, like, that is the most important part. I would say, like, there needs to be I don't want to change gears and go into like tempo. I was gonna say in a breaststroke race, like you need to be able to get to a little bit of a long tempo, and then also be able to touch on a much faster tempo too within one person's race. And so like someone needs to be able to have that skill set to change gears. And in changing gears, I do think it's the heels coming up quicker, but not necessarily like not rushing through this part, the very top.
I think you got to be careful not to accelerate around the corners. It has to set here and then push back. It can't come around the corners. And I think we made the mistake of coming around the corner too aggressively. I don't know. Like I said, that was what, 2007, Tyler?
Yeah, it's been a little while.
And I'm still thinking about it. I still haven't figured out what I did there.
Hey, Russ, last thing on breaststroke, we wanted to talk about the pull down, because I know that there's been a ton of evaluation. 10, 15 years ago, we had Ed Spencer in town, and he was, talking about the timing. 5.5 seconds is what people do underwater from they leave the wall to the breakout. And, there's a lot of that discussion. But the reality is the athletes are so much better now, I think, jumping off the wall and moving water than I think we've ever been. What are some of the key things you see in the underwater pull down that has changed?
And do we need a pause in between the pull and the kick, or should it be rushed through? I think that's because as age group coaches, we've taught it as 1 Mississippi, 2 Mississippi. I'm interested in your thoughts on that.
Yeah, I think the most important thing with the pullout is maintaining the integrity of your body line. And I think that hasn't really changed with the integration of the dolphin kick. If anything, like that needs to be more of a focus, because with the dolphin kick, people are trying to take these huge dolphin kicks. The hips are popping up, the feet are ending way out of body line. The body's ending up in weird positions, and then you have to reset into a good body line. So I think that's the most important thing that needs to be done. I do think that with the pull, I think that an athlete needs to think of it as a fly stroke without the kick to support it. So when you're taking the pull, tighten your core, like really engage your core and try to like tighten your abs as you make that pull. I think that could make it stronger, because with the fly stroke, you're taking that pull and you have that kick to kind of maintain the integrity through your core to help you do that. And with the breaststroke pull down, you don't have that. So pull, tighten your abs. I would say you're trying to take the dolphin kick for the most part, like before the pull, and then hold your line, get into a line, take your pull, make sure you have a good line. And I think you can pause in between the strokes as long as your line is good. And so if you have a bad line, gosh, like you'll have nothing to ride off of that, ride the pull off of. So really important to the body line is for all that. And if you do have a good line, I do think you might as well take advantage of that and maintain that speed that you've just generated.
So one of the things that Ray is talking about in Indiana with Cody and Lily and those guys is that when they do that pull, that if they do the dolphin kick during the pull, that they're only doing a down kick and they're letting the body right itself. There's no up kick on that fly kick during that pull out. I mean, is that what we assume to be best practice at this point?
Yeah, that's what I like. I think one way I talk about it is like kick into your line, don't kick through your line. And it is a little bit different, obviously, than what we just talked about.
Right. I was going to say it's the opposite of what we just talked about.
Because because if you kick through your line, your hips end up really like this. You're not doing consecutive kicks. You're just doing one kick, and you have to ride that speed forward. And
you're doing one kick, and you have to end up flat. Right? Isn't that the goal?
Close to it. Yeah, exactly. So the further you kick past the line, you're not, there's no up kick that you can really get good propulsion off of when you're just doing a single kick.
Yeah. All right. that answers my question.
And then what about, you talked about that change in speed. You talked about that ability of, and you see it, I think, especially in the 200, those great breaststrokers at the elite level and even at the age group level, those guys who at the end of the race can naturally keep their hips up without sacrificing going down, and they can load the heels faster and move everything. So what are the biggest differences between maybe short course and long course breaststroke and how people are swimming those right now?
Well, I actually think in short course breaststroke, you can maintain your length and your tempo a little bit easier because you're just taking less strokes per length. And so either you can be like Kevin Cordes and just take 3 or 4 strokes the entire time and still be effective. Yeah.
Yeah.
Hey, Jeremy Lin was doing it 20 years ago.
That's true.
Yeah, but when it comes to long course, I mean, you're taking 50 strokes in 100, 40, 50 strokes in 100, and your 50th stroke is just going to have be a lot less effective than your first stroke, and you're going to have a lot less to glide off of on your 50th stroke. So you have to make up for that with some better tempo. So I think there is a difference, and I'm actually seeing that in at the top 8 at NC2As too. So I think, when it comes to short course, I do feel like we should start thinking about being able to train at different tempos. The world record holder for the men's 200 breaststroke, Anton Chupkov, from Russia, he starts out his 200 at a 2.4 tempo and ends at a 1.4 tempo. And the difference is, and he's effective in both the first 50 and the last 50. But that
isn't Evamova somewhere in that range as well?
Yes, totally. And I'm not saying that we have to go to that extreme, but I do think an awareness that being effective on your last 50 of a breaststroke race is going to be connected to how well you can tempo up in breaststroke. And that, to me, then also, just like fly, like, how do you practice that in training? How do you prepare for that in training? And obviously in training, you do see a lot of tired breaststroke. So maybe that tired breaststroke should be at a little bit higher tempo and doing that effectively. And doing that effectively is obviously less glide, but then also getting your feet up quickly so that your feet can catch up, can stay at a good tempo with your arms.
So yeah. I had a pretty good long course breaststroker girl this past summer. And I was really struggling with the front half of the race. And I called Jeremy Lin and I talked to Jeremy, and Jeremy talked to me about stroke counts and about time at the wall. So it was stroke count and time at the wall. If you can go 39 and you can be 19 strokes, or you can go 40 and you can be 20 strokes, that's where you need to be. That's where you need to train. And we did that all summer. And she went from 244 to 238 long course 200 breaststroke as a 12-year-old. Like, I feel like that concept of distance per stroke, but maintaining not necessarily tempo, but maintaining time, going near your goal pace times per 50, is pretty effective for younger kids. I don't know. Am I going down the right road here? I see you nodding yes, but
yeah, no, absolutely. Like, I do feel like, I mean, we can teach. I think it's pretty easier to teach tempoing up at an older age than it is trying to teach them good length, because good length requires great technique, great body line, great body awareness. And so teaching that at a younger age and layering on top of that the ability to tempo up effectively, that can be second for sure. I just don't want it to be not thought of at all. But I love that. Obviously, talking about cycle counts at a younger age for all strokes, I think is a great plan, long-term plan.
So Bryan, we're doing this with age group kids, right? And we're doing this with 11 to 14. So there's a lot of range of strokes and what you're teaching. For me, one of the things that I try to do, and I don't know if it's right or wrong, but what we do in practice is when we're kicking breaststroke, for the ability simply to be able to change your kick rate of the lift of the heels at the end. Like, we have a rule, like, there's no slow breaststroke kick. There's just no slow, take your time and kick smooth, and unless it's some kind of distance per kick work we would do when they're really, really young. But once they're in my group, we're trying to be explosive. Once we get the hips loaded up and the feet loaded, we're trying to finish the kick and be snappy all the way through, so that we are practicing that press. What are you guys doing, Bryan, for age group kids to kind of keep their hips up?
So for me, when we do breaststroke kick, we talk about hips to heels. So we go we want to see power from your hips to your heels. So you're starting here and then you're finishing there, and that's where everything happens. I don't spend a lot of time with the age group kids just because, like I mentioned earlier, I got burned on bring the heels up faster. So I don't spend a lot of time on that with the kids. If I have a kid that I think can do it, I'll make sure to mention it, but say, hey, make sure you get set before you go, even if there's a pause.
Yep.
But that's pretty much what we look at. I don't probably do a good enough job with breaststroke or monitoring breaststroke kick. Most of my breaststrokers are pretty good about working hard on it, and they like it. So it kind of takes care of itself. And then my kids who aren't breaststrokers, I'm in Texas, so if you're not good at breaststroke, you're never going to make tags in breaststroke, even if you're really good, because it's too fast. So we just don't even. We specify a little bit earlier than we probably should, just because of the nature of our beast here in Texas. Bigger and better, right?
Russell, what are you hearing coaches say that they're working on? Are they working on, I mean, obviously with the older kids, they're working maybe more resistance on that kick and things like that to kind of get some extra force in there. What are you hearing other coaches say, like Chuck, guys like that, about breaststroke?
Not hearing that much specific. Other than the usual things, like, how wide your knees are, pushing water back. I'd say I just hear a lot of that, kind of the same old, not the same old, but just a lot of the things that we've talked about for, in the swimming community for a long time, is just, so not a whole lot of unusual stuff. But I do think, layering on the resistance as athletes get older, but not really like on their feet or anything, but just like maybe kicking on a tower or kicking against with a bucket or something like that.
All right, Bryan, well, you threw in a question you wanted to ask Russell for our thing, so give it to you.
Oh, yeah. So, Russell, just out of curiosity, man, seem like a smart guy, and I just want to know what's on your reading list, buddy. What do you got going on right now, and what would you give me as, like, I'm not a big reader, but I feel like 2 or 3 books that you think are invaluable to what it is we do, and not even necessarily swimming related, just in general. I mean, I'd throw Outliers by Malcolm Gladwell out there as the one that I would, say is pretty important to me. But yeah, what do you got for me, man? Give me something to read now that we're in COVID crisis.
My reading stuff is going to be so far away from swimming, but I will give you one swimming thing afterwards, but it won't be reading. Hey,
Joe, can you put these in the comments?
The book that I'm reading right now is titled The Pursuit of Endurance, and it's not actually about swimming endurance or related to my efforts in focusing on distance events. It's basically a trail runner, Jennifer Farr Davis. She wrote this book. She was the person who did the Appalachian Trail in the fastest known time. She held that record for 4 years, from 2011 to 2015. And so she just kind of is kind of detailing the history of people trying to do these 1,000-mile trails and how they do it fast. I'm a big hiker myself, so that's what I'm reading. And honestly, my favorite quote has come out of that book, the quote that I kind of come back to, and it's a really long one. So, but I think that is, that's what I'm currently reading. I just finished reading the Steve Jobs bio. And I love that, just for, like, obviously Apple products are part of everybody's life, and understanding the thought process of his leadership and his flawed leadership at times and also just vision and being able to pursue something with a drive and a passion, and how those two things sometimes ends up with great results, and oftentimes ends up with great results if you are passionate about something. And if you're not into reading, like I just finished a podcast on the Tim Ferriss show, interviewing Maurice Ashley, who was the first African-American chess grandmaster. And he talks, it's interesting because at the 1 hour mark, he talks about how he was coaching chess. And to me, he talked about what it means to be a great teacher. And I think, when I heard him talk about it, kind of at that 1 hour mark, is, I related to how we talk about coaching and how we talk about teaching young athletes things. So I thought that was really cool, because he himself was a phenomenal chess player, but really was also a very effective coach. And then in terms of swimming, the one thing that I'm really diving into actually has to do with distance swimming, but nothing to do with the book that I'm reading. It's a swim coach, a couple swim coaches have turned me on to the work of Dr. Steven Seiler. He's an American researcher who is now based in Norway. And he has done a lot of research on people training endurance sports, mostly land-based endurance sports, triathlon, running, cross-country skiing, and talking about how that training gets divided and gets to be, and how systematic that training is, and how that is. And just learning about that and thinking about how we can apply that to swimming and what that means for being good at distance events and what we have to do in that. So I haven't started I guess I'm 15 minutes into a 3 hour, 4 hour presentation. But it's definitely something that those are kind of the things that are getting my brain going right now. And the people that I'm you mentioned John T. Skinner, he is one guy that I have my entire career at USA Swimming and continue. We've emailed a bunch during this time. I've read all of his stuff. I'm not as good at checking the Facebook Coaches Exchange group. So I'm on his one person mailing list. He'll just email it to me directly because I don't really check it. So, he's the guy that I would say is always push my brain and my mind forward, and continues to. And at first I always his stuff just blew my mind. I didn't understand what he was talking about. And I would encourage people to have patience with it and just really try to understand where he's coming from, because there are some phenomenal ideas in it.
Have you read Born to Run?
I have, and it definitely made
Fantastic.
me run the longest I ever have the next day.
That's great. That Dr. Seiler stuff is good. I think he calmed a lot of swim coaches' nerves really early on in the quarantine period, because there were a lot of swim coaches really nervous, and then they saw his kind of take on what the long-term, physiology of being out of the water may or may not do. And I think a lot of coaches are kind of rethinking some rest periods for their athletes right now, to rethink how we're giving them breaks and letting them recover. And especially at age group guys, how much they grow. I mean, I've got some kids that have just they're trees compared to little shrubs when they left. So it's been good to see. All right. So I think last thing we're going to do real quick, guys, I got a workout here. Joe, if you don't mind, pop that up. This is an 11 to 14 group that I have, and just a practice that we did last week. And so, Bryan and I have talked about this before. I try to put a lot of skills, a lot of different variations of stuff in our warm-up. So we went a 200 free, just breathing by threes, working on finishing your strokes, and went right into a vertical kick, or you could go either egg beater kick or just regular breaststroke kick, hands up out of the water when you're doing that, not in streamline, but just up out of the water. Went into 425s on 40, where we did a little body wave drill, where we're just trying to really get engaged in pressing that chest and moving forward, and transferred that right into breaststroke swim by 12.5. Threw some fins on and went a 200 kick kind of mixing up body planes there. This was all dolphin kick for that day. So we went on your side, on your back. I actually like them to go hands by their side on their back when they're changing planes like that, so they can get a little bit more of the snap in the kick and bend that knee and get through there. Do a 50 on their side and then just a 50 body position on the surface, with the idea, like Russell said earlier, that every kick is equal and as powerful as the one before that. Drop in a vertical kick dolphin, 425, same setup as the first time through. We're going body wave, press that chest into fly. All of that butterfly part right there is done with fins on. We'll drop the fins, go a 200 free on a breathing pattern with that last 50, trying to work on that early low and quick breath, that quick breath technique. And we do that later in the practice too. Do a vertical kick flutter. We do grab a pull buoy and do a skull progression where we do a little bit of front skull, hands out front, fingertips down, some windshield wiper to really dig into that out sweep. And this is something that one of my former assistants who swam at Texas A&M got, that they do out there, just a heads up breaststroke. So go from that windshield wiper right into a heads up breaststroke to really drive that hand into the corner of that out sweep. And then a V or a scrunch skull at the end of that. We go a 200 IM drill swim there, and those are all pre-assigned drills, so they know what drill they're supposed to be doing for themselves. We do a vertical kick choice and then finish with 425's IM order build. So this day was actually a butterfly and breaststroke day, so it kind of fits in nicely to the stuff we talked about today. And both of the stroke development sets are the exact same breakdown of the set. So 2 rounds of 425's on 30. Those were all fly. I'm trying to have great technique, and I love short axis with age group kids to have them count strokes. We count strokes all the time. They've got to do a minimum of 4 underwater dolphin kicks on each of those 425's. They can kick it out as far as they want to. And for those in practice, there is no 15-meter rule for us. So if you want to push it and kick 18 meters, more power to you, big guy. Go do it. So we'll do 425's there. 350s on 55, and we'll go last, middle, first, third. Basically, we do the middle as a full 25 where they're doing fast fly. On the outsides of that fast part, they're trying to just go freestyle, nice and smooth. And then we go just some of my keys. I want their eyes to be down during the breath. Not there's fine. I'm fine with a lift, just not a look up and forward at the blocks or at the wall in front of them. Make sure the head hits before the hand hits. And then getting into that, again, that narrow dynamic catch where the hands are moving forward. And we talk a lot about never letting the fingertips go out once the hands get in the water, not letting the hands sweep out and just wasted time to get over the top and engage that catch. So we did 2 rounds of that fly. And then we do a set on Tuesdays, like a progressive set where we start at an easier interval. And again, these are 11 to 14-year-olds at varying efforts, but they're doing 20 50s, a group on 50, a group on 55. They're just make interval and work your walls and all the skills. So the skills they've got to do on all 20, they've got to work on early, low, and quick breath technique all the way through, trying to time that breath when the opposite hand is hitting the water and kind of swivel that chin forward rather than lift and get that false pressure up front. No breath. Don't start a lap of freestyle with a breath. No breath at the breakout. And at the turn, they've got to go heels past the flags underwater, and no breath, 2 strokes in and 2 strokes out of the turn. And then learn to put your head down at the end and take those last 5 or 6 strokes without a breath. So we do that on Tuesdays, and we drop that interval every few weeks just to give them a challenge. If they want to go fast on those, again, more power to you. Just got to make sure you make the interval, and you can go as fast as you want as long as you hit those skills. Then we came back and did the same kind of similar setup with the fly one. We did a breaststroke where they count their strokes, then go through a little bit of speed variation, a little bit of variables there. And just the focus for the breaststroke that day was surging forward into your body line, really trying to give everything you can to allow, like Russell said earlier, allow space for your chest and head to fill that triangle forward, and then making sure you finish the kick before you start the next stroke, that out sweep. Did 2 rounds of that, and then we finished up with a little bit of a kick set, and that was 16 50s on 115. Putting your snorkel on, putting your face in the water. And that's just honestly as much because I want to see good effort and not as much paying attention to what the other person's doing. We'll go odd 50s, first 25 fast, even 50s best effort. And I like to go odd 50s first 25 fast rather than like a moderate fast, because I think, honestly, age group kids, if they start out kicking fast, they have a greater likelihood that they'll continue that rather than kind of go moderate or slow up front and then actually move to a full throttle kick the second 25. I like to go right from that push off and get started there. And then a best effort 50 with a goal, can you hold sub 40 on all of those even 50s? Kept the snorkel on and went 825s freestyle, just swim with really good technique, kind of reset a little bit of muscle memory at the end. So that was our Tuesday workout, guys. That should be available for you guys there. What you got, Bryan? Mute there.
Yeah, let me unmute myself. No, this was great. Oh, my cat's making an appearance.
Called in here earlier.
No, this was great, man. Russell, I'd love to have you on every 6 weeks or so if you want to come back, man. I'd love to talk freestyle and backstroke. I mean, I'd love to talk. I mean, I think, every 6 to 8 weeks, if you want to pop on with us and do this, I think it would be awesome. I think there was a lot of information here, and I think a lot of people got a lot out of it. I know I did. So thank you very much for coming on. And Tyler, what are your thoughts, man?
Great stuff. Russell, always great stuff, man. I love the perspective coming at it from a very analytical. That's myself. So Bryan and I are always shooting ideas back and forth, but it's good to have somebody else on there. We've had so many great guests, and we appreciate you being one as well.
Yeah.
Hey, and if you know anybody that wants to come on, let us know, man.
Yeah, this is very cool. I love the age group focus. I love the perspective you guys bring. Obviously a lot of my eyes are usually on our elite athletes, but obviously I know they come from somewhere and they get developed by great coaches like yourself. And I, love hearing how that happens and talk and integrating the conversation, bringing it all together and having this kind of focus. So you guys are doing something really awesome for the sport. And I'd love to come back. You just let me know when.
Awesome. That sounds good. All right, everybody out there, thanks for joining us. We hope you guys all got something out of this, and we'll see you guys next week on Holding Water. Thanks, guys.
Join us on the SwimMonkey.
SwimMonkey
SwimMonkey TV.
on the Monkey.